associated with that incident. A Superior Court judge authorized the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department to release that publicly. In North Carolina, we have to go through a Superior Court judge to get the authorization to release body-worn camera video footage. That was released. It showed the car stop, it showed the transport, it showed the interview room, it showed the attempts, unsuccessful attempts, to revive Mr. Easter. And that's why we're here this afternoon, is to answer questions, give some context around some of those videos that were released this morning. For those at home who do have an opportunity via social media, conventional media, I just want to put a qualifier out there. Incredibly tough stuff to watch. Excruciating stuff to watch. I mean, essentially, for all intent and purpose, you're watching a 41-year-old man lose his life, and it's incredibly tough to watch. So I just wanted to qualify all this before we took a step further. Behind me and to the side of me, we've had just a cross-section of our community. We have the clergy, we have elected officials, we have our city manager, Marcus Jones, our mayor, Vi Lyles, Willie Ratchford with our community relations committee. We've got local advocacy groups, the clergy, which I just mentioned a moment ago, our ambassadors from the city of Charlotte. A lot of them are going to be available for one-offs after we're through here. I'd like to begin today, though, by introducing our police chief, Johnny Jennings, to kind of walk you through, and he'll turn it over to the mayor. Chief Jennings.
Thank you, Rob. Before I pass it on to the mayor, I wanted to just say a few words, so I'll be brief. It's been extremely heartbreaking to me to see what the impact that this has had on the Easter family. I've had some multiple communications with them. They're good people, something that they should not have to endure and live through. I do pray that they find comfort in knowing that the police department did what we had to do to hold these officers accountable. And I don't believe these officers had malicious intent, but they did make a bad decision and they didn't follow policy. So those bad decisions have consequences, especially when those decisions have contributed to the loss of a life that we had the responsibility to protect. If someone's in our custody, they're also in our care. I've watched the video several times, arguably one of the most difficult videos that I've had to watch in my entire career. It troubles me even more to know that had the officers followed policy and made better decisions, there may have been a different outcome. I could stand here all day and tell you how many great contacts that our officers have with our citizens every day. However, those words are hollow to the Easter family. As a police chief, I can't change what happened to Mr. Easter. I wish I could. What I can do is make sure that I'm reforming policies, practices, and departmental cultures to align with the community expectations. I can ensure that members of this department will continue to be held accountable when their actions violate policy and impact community trust. I ask the community to keep Mr. Easter's family and the former officers' families in your prayers and thoughts. As a department, we'll continue to identify opportunities to learn from tragedies like this and do everything we can to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So again, thank you for coming out. I want to introduce Mayor Vi Lyles to come up and say a few words as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. The very first thing that we have to do as a city, as a department for our police department, is we have to acknowledge that this incident has been a tragedy for Harold Easter's family. We have to acknowledge the fact that there is another life lost. As a result, we also have to understand that we have to ask each other to understand that there are consequences to these kinds of actions, and we have to seek to move forward. So we understand that the consequences were great for 5 men who were participating in this effort of this loss. We have to understand that they've all resigned, and that's difficult for them, but I understand that the community knows that it's even more difficult when you look around and deal with the issues of race in our community, in our city. The final thing that I want to say is that you always know when something has happened that you have to deal with it. But as mayor of a city like Charlotte, we also have to understand that we can acknowledge and learn and move forward. So I want to acknowledge that you can see the differences in the policies that Chief Jennings has instituted. You can see the difference in the way that he approached this investigation. And you can see the difference the way that he has communicated with every member of this department. And that's what's necessary for us to begin to understand. Change is taking place. It's taking place within the department and taking place inside of our own community. I understand the sense of anger and loss, but I ask for this community to also understand that as we are moving in a direction to reimagine our police department, that we've taken the first step, the chief has taken the first step to acknowledge, investigate, and act. As mayor, that gives me great confidence, and I so much appreciate the city. I don't know when the next time I'll stand before you, and I hope it's never. But when I stand before you, know it is with a heavy heart as mayor of the city that's great and good at its core. And we just have to figure out a way to move this out in a way that the community understands it, the department understands it, and we act on it. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm to introduce Willie Ratchford, who leads our Community Relations Committee. Thank you, Willie.
Thank you, Mayor Lyles. Let me start by saying that my thoughts and prayers are with the Easter family. While there may be various reactions to the video that was released earlier today, we must remember that there's a family who is still grieving over the loss of a loved one. I know that we are hurting in this community and across our nation because of the challenges of race and police-community relations. Even though these are challenging times, my hope is that we can come together to talk to one another and not necessarily at one another. We must work together on reconciliation because we cannot afford to give up on the work that it takes to make our community a better community. Community Relations continues to work with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department to build trust and promote transparency within the community. The chief has communicated some of the changes to policies and practices. The police department is also committed to hearing from the community. Our departments have worked together for many years to ensure that the community has a space or safe space to actually have difficult conversation and work together on positive solutions. None of us want situations like this to continue to happen, and that means that we must be committed to meaningful, lasting change. Change that is built on trust and can be seen and felt throughout all parts of our community. Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions. Before we do, if you could just direct your questions to any one of the individuals that we had speaking here, and whomever it is that is responding, if you would just, for the interest of people at home on social media, maybe repeat the question back before you respond, so those at home that are watching this on the screen know what the response is and what the original question is.
The question for Chief. Chief, with the officers resigning, do you have concerns that they will in fact gain employment at the department?
So the question is, with the officers in fact resigning, do I have concerns that they will join other departments? And the answer to that is I have to make sure that within personnel records and personnel files within CMPD that we're doing what we can to note down what happened, and we have done that. And so any department that is seeking these officers for employment, will come to us and ask for personnel records, and this will be reflected in their personnel records. So I don't have control over telling an agency not to hire one of these former officers. However, they're doing their due diligence, which is most departments do. They will be able to get the information that we have here.
What exactly was the policy that was violated, and what is the protocol for both monitoring someone who's in custody,
Yes.
but also calling the ambulance or getting medical attention? At what point should the officers be doing that?
Okay, so the question was that what policy changes have been made, and what policies were violated as a result of this?
Policies were violated.
Yes.
At what point, as far as monitoring and calling for further action?
And question about monitoring and what should have happened. So I'll tell you, there were two policies dealing with this that had major concerns for me, and one is our policy is pretty clear, cut and dry, that if you believe or should know that someone ingested a narcotic, then you should call medic immediately, and medic should come to the scene and treat that individual. Also, the policy used to state when you put someone inside of an interview room or when someone's in your custody, you are not to leave that person unattended for more than 15 minutes. That policy changed immediately back in January, or maybe it was February, early February, that we no longer have a time frame that you have to monitor. You have to continuously monitor both audio and visual. So you're either monitoring on through a video and audio camera, or you're in person with that individual. So those are some of the changes that we made there. Now, again, you mentioned what should have happened. As soon as they secured Mr. Easter in handcuffs, somebody should have gotten on the radio and asked dispatch to start medic their way to do an evaluation for him.
Why weren't officers cited for termination until 8 months later, right before his public release?
So the question is, why weren't officers cited for termination until 8 months later, after this had happened? That's a good question that I hope I can address it properly. That when this investigation was turned over to the State Bureau of Investigations to conduct their investigation. Generally, in the past, when CMPD conducted these investigations on the criminal side, the internal investigation was parallel to that. So we were able to get the interviews and all of that, everything we needed, any evidence that we needed. We were able to get that pretty quickly and go through with the internal investigation. But the procedure used to be that we would wait until the criminal investigation and decision by the DA was complete, and then we would start the internal investigation. I felt like that was far too long. It's not fair to the community. It's not fair to the officers that were waiting months and months. And had we waited, we wouldn't even have begun the investigation until last week, internal investigation. So the officers were immediately pulled off the line and put on administrative leave. I brought them back to administrative assignment as soon as I was sworn in as the chief. And I also ordered that the investigation move forward quickly and swiftly. And that's why we're standing here today. The results of the investigation has been completed, and the independent review board was able to come to a decision and recommended termination to me, which I endorsed.
Just follow up on that.
Yes.
When the video was ordered to be released, it was September 11th, September 17th. That was when you issued the independent chain of command review board that eventually did the cited determination. Can you say if that was direct correlation to that video being released to the public soon?
No, ma'am. We had that scheduled. I'm sorry. The question was the correlation between the independent chain of command review and the release of the videos, the close proximity of those as far as dates are concerned. But what I'll tell you is we had that date set prior to even the judge even ordering the video to be released. So it was more of a coincidence that it happened to be that date. And I know during the hearing, it was also relayed to the judge of when we had that internal hearing scheduled as well.
Chief, can I agree with the district attorney's decision
So the question is, do I agree with the district attorney's decision not to criminally charge the officers? What I can tell you is the district attorney is the expert at this. I respect his decision. They have a lot different view. It's to them, it's more than just policy violations. I'm not going to second guess anything that the district attorney has made that decision, because they were much more thorough in this investigation than many people know, and that's why it took several weeks for them to get through it and make their decision. So I respect that decision.
Given
Despite the DA's decision not to criminally charge, seeing the video handling this case, do you personally believe if officers and Sergeant followed policy, Harold Easter would still be alive today?
Well, let me tell you, I believe that if they had followed policy, we would have, at the minimum, given Harold Easter a chance. So I can't tell you I'm not a doctor, so the toxicity level of the cocaine that he ingested, I can't tell you if that was lethal, regardless of medical attention or not. But what I can tell you is we have a responsibility to at least give him that chance to survive, and that's what officers failed to do that.
Given it was 4 officers and a sergeant who didn't follow that long-standing policy of calling a medic, do you feel confident that all your officers are well-versed in CMPD policy?
You know, I think we have measures in place to ensure that officers are understanding of the policy. We have a lot of policies that officers are expected. We even have a policy to ensure they know the policy. So we take measures to ensure that they do. However, there are certain things that should not even be second guessed as far as what you need to do. If someone ingests a large amount of cocaine or ingests narcotics, then it's pretty clear that many officers have been doing this for years, that we call for medic and get them medical attention. I've been in that situation, and probably several officers have been in that same situation as I have. So. So the question is it clear to me that the officers did know that he ingested cocaine? It's clear to me that the officers knew or should have known. Based on comments made by the officers, based on comments made from Mr. Easter himself, there's no doubt in my mind that officers either knew or should have known that he had ingested cocaine.
these 5 officers know Mr. Easter, and one of the body camera footage, they said he's a well-known individual, and they probably worked that neighborhood other times. They know him beforehand.
So the question is, did they know Mr. Easter beforehand? And the answer to that is yes, they did.
Can you explain how or any other run-ins they might have had together?
I'm not. She's asking if I can explain other run-ins they might have had together. I don't know what run-ins they did have prior. I know they've been out with him before. They knew him by first and last name. Mr. Easter even knew some of the officers, to my understanding. But he was familiar with the officers, and they were familiar with him.
I know CMPD has limited control on this, but are those officers still eligible to collect pension, and would they have been eligible if they'd gone through the civil service board process?
Okay, so the question is, are the officers eligible to collect pension, and would they have been eligible to do that had they gone through the civil service process? And the answer, yes, they have been. The pension, there's a misunderstanding that pension is, people don't understand that pension is paid into by the officers, so it's their money. So the officers, as a police officer, I pay into pension out of each of my paychecks. And so when I retire, that money that's coming back to me is what I have has assisted in contributing myself. So yes, those officers are entitled to their pension.
Anybody else with the chief?
So she's asked me the question, even though they've resigned, are they still entitled to that pension? And yes, ma'am, they are.
With the new policy of continuous monitoring, I guess how do the officers decide who's doing that? Do they have to be in the room with him, or can they monitor audio, visual while they're in the interview room? Can you explain more how that policy will be implemented?
So the question is, explain more about the policy of continuous monitoring, and that's pretty clear. It can be either in person. You either And that's not just when we put someone in the interview room. That's continuous from the point that I take someone into custody, that I'm going to make sure that person is in my care and I'm taking care of that individual. So in the vehicle, you need to be monitoring that individual. When you get to if you take them to a police station and put that person in an interview room, we have a couple of ways to do that. One of those is to sit in there in person with the individual. And also we have audio and video surveillance in each interview room. And officers have that capability to monitor both audio and video of anybody that's placed in that room. So the continuous part means that I can't let this person out of my sight, and I have to monitor that person at all times. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Any officers hired here to maybe resign from other departments in lieu of termination? And if not, how would you handle it?
Okay, the question is, am I aware of any officers with CMPD that are employed here who may have resigned in lieu of termination from another agency? And my answer to that is no, I'm not. And I would be very surprised if anyone is employed here. We do have lateral officers who have left other agencies and come to Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. However, we require those officers to sign a waiver so that we can get their personnel files from the agency they worked in. So we would not hire an officer, and I'm going to say this because I'm not aware of any that we have, and I'd be surprised if we have any, but we would not hire someone who has resigned from another agency in lieu of termination.
And then when Mr. Easter was in the interview room by himself, where were the 5 officers? You said you had the audio-visual technology to be able to monitor that way. So did they have that capability? Were they in a different room discussing the case? I guess, where were they during this?
Yes, so the questions, where were the other officers during the time that Mr. Easter was in the interview room by himself? They were in various different locations within the team office. There were some officers doing some paperwork. I know there was an officer in one area that was doing the paperwork for the evidence that was collected on the scene. So there were different locations within the building, and then when they realized that Mr. Easter was having a medical emergency, they did reconvene at that location and began to administer aid to him.
All right, we appreciate everyone. Anything independent of this, we can have a follow-up offline.
All right, thank you.
Mayor.